the UFC only pays its fighters like 10% of its income, whereas like in the NBA and NFL, the athletes get paid 50% of the total income. So like this is a massive discrepancy. They don't have health insurance, all of these.
When Jake Paul called out Dana White for underpaying fighters, few had the courage to back him. But now, a wave of shocking betrayals and hidden scandals has forced UFC stars to rise up against the man who built the empire. The revolt has already begun. The cracks are showing. And at the center of it all, Dana White himself. Dana White is the problem. That's not a fan's drunken fight night tweet. That's what fighters, plural, are now whispering behind closed doors, while a brave few scream it publicly. And this time, it's not about a missed bonus or a bad judging call. It's about something deeper. A quiet, organized rebellion from the very people Dana White depends on most. His fighters. Because while the world praises Dana as the maverick who saved MMA, few see the empire of exploitation he built behind the Octagon. But now, the warriors of that empire are finally saying enough. One UFC champion even said it on camera. Dana White doesn't give a damn about us. That's coming up. But first, here's how the walls of the UFC's carefully crafted image began to crumble, and how it all started with someone Dana White never saw coming. Jake Paul.
I don't have health insurance, all of these things. And so I just started simply speaking on it, and it became this massive thing between me and Dana White where we just constantly were beefing back and forth for years. But genuinely, I was just like, hey man, you're paying these fighters a minimum of $12,000 for a fight. They're risking their lives. Why not just increase it to $50,000? You're going to make the sport better because they're going to take it more seriously.
These weren't just words from a YouTuber turned boxer. Jake Paul's call-out was the spark that ignited a fire across the MMA world. Fighters once silent, once loyal, began to find their voices, and what they said was damning. At first, Paul's attacks were dismissed as trolling. But he was speaking the truth UFC fighters had been too afraid to say, that they're risking their lives for poverty-level wages, with no retirement plan, no long-term health coverage, and sometimes no guarantee of getting paid at all unless they stay in Dana's good graces. This isn't about one bad contract or one underpaid card. This is about a system that chews up its talent and calls it promotion. Fighters earning $12,000 to step into a cage while the UFC brings in billions every year. How long can that last? Not much longer, and fighters know it. Take Max Holloway, a warrior by every definition. He walked into his last fight with Dustin Poirier, delivered one of the most emotional brawls in years, and still walked out feeling betrayed. Not because he lost, he won, but because he didn't get fight of the night. And deep down, he knew exactly why.
How the hell did we not get fight of the night, bro? What is he thinking, bro? Come on, Dana.
That's not a sore loser talking. That's a champion saying Dana White doesn't reward greatness. He controls it. If you're not in his favor, if you're not obedient, if you're not a company man, your bonus vanishes. Your title shot disappears. Your name gets erased. And then there's the disrespect. You'd think a fighter who's gone through 3 wars with Volkanovski, survived brutal rounds with Poirier, and became a BMF legend would at least get a thank you. But no, Max Holloway had to beg the UFC just to be acknowledged, just to get the bonus he'd earned. And even then, Dana didn't budge, yet through it all, Max smiled. Why? Because he knows what comes next. The revolt has begun, quietly, subtly, but undeniably. When a guy like Max Holloway starts pointing fingers, it's not just Jake Paul stirring the pot anymore. It's the fighters you'd never expect. The loyal ones. The humble ones, the ones who fought injured, cut weight till they nearly passed out, and defended the system that now betrays them. And this isn't just about money, it's about manipulation. Silencing.fear. Do you realize most UFC fighters can't even talk about pay publicly without risking their contracts? Some have allegedly been warned they'll be blacklisted for even mentioning unionizing. Think about that. In an era where every major sport has player unions, the UFC still runs on total control. Contracts that own a fighter's likeness, limit sponsorships, control their medical care, dictate when they can fight, even who they can train with. It's feudalism, wrapped in a Reebok kit. And through it all, Dana White sits at press conferences, laughing off criticism like it's a joke. But to the fighters, it's not a joke. It's survival. This is the part you never see on UFC Embedded, where fighters fight twice in one night, once in the cage, and once to beg their manager for rent money. Jake Paul didn't just call out fighter pay, he called out the culture of silence Dana White built. Because when Dana isn't lowballing contracts, he's publicly humiliating fighters who step out of line. Remember when Francis Ngannou left the UFC? Dana said it was because Francis didn't want to take risks. The truth? Francis walked away because he refused to sign a deal that stripped away his freedom, a deal that would have kept him from boxing. Where he made more in one night than he ever did defending his UFC title 5 times, that wasn't greed. That was courage. It wasn't about a fighter asking for more. It was about a man refusing to be owned. And how did Dana respond? With smears, spin, and silence, Ngannou became a pariah, a coward in UFC media. Then months later, he stepped into a boxing ring with Tyson Fury and shook the combat sports world. That wasn't luck. That was freedom. And that's what scares Dana White most. Not Jake Paul's tweets. Not Max Holloway's outbursts, but the idea that UFC fighters might finally realize their worth and walk away. But here's the part that should terrify the UFC the most. They're talking to each other. Behind the scenes, sources say fighters are organizing, sharing contracts, comparing pay, swapping horror stories, even discussing unionizing through private chats and Discord servers. The one thing Dana White has always feared is happening. A united front, because revolts don't start with explosions. They start with whispers. And right now, the UFC locker rooms are echoing with them. So when Jake Paul says,
Just knocked out a 5-time UFC champion and embarrassed your whole company, and please let me get Kamaru Usman. Please let me get Diaz. Please let me get Masvidal. Please let me get McGregor. Because I'm going to embarrass them too. I promise you that, Dana. I promise you.
That's not just an insult. That's a warning that the fighters are watching and they're done being silent. The machine of manipulation runs deeper than anyone realized. What started as complaints about low pay or missing bonuses was only the surface. Beneath it lies a system of rigged contracts, broken promises, and a corporate culture built to crush rebellion before it can begin. Because fighters aren't just controlled by money. They're controlled by legal traps, media manipulation, and a level of psychological warfare that would make even Vince McMahon blush. This is Dana White's UFC. And now, former champions, rising stars, and longtime veterans are speaking out in ways the organization never wanted the public to hear. So let's talk about what you weren't supposed to know. Let's talk about the lawsuits. In 2021, the UFC quietly tried to bury a massive class action lawsuit filed by dozens of fighters. At its core, allegations that the UFC used exclusive contracts, hostile acquisitions, and coercive tactics to suppress fighter pay and eliminate competition across MMA. One court filing even described the UFC as a monopoly, a company that kept fighters dependent, underpaid, and too afraid to speak out. And here's the part that shocked everyone. According to court documents, some UFC contracts were so restrictive that fighters couldn't even fight elsewhere or retire and fight later in another promotion without risking a lawsuit. You heard that right. Quit fighting and they could still come after you. That's not a promotion. That's a prison. And Dana White? He's never addressed it head on. Instead, he hides behind press conferences, viral sound bites, and the illusion of being for the fans. But behind that curtain, fighters describe a culture where loyalty is demanded, not earned, where rewards are arbitrary, and silence is survival. It's not just about money. It's about control. A psychological game where fighters are left wondering whether loyalty gets them promoted or punished. Max Holloway gave fans a war. He gave Dustin Poirier respect. He gave the UFC everything they could have asked for. And what did he get? Silence. And Max isn't alone. Jorge Masvidal, once one of Dana's poster boys, admitted in 2019 that he had to fight the UFC just to get fair pay after headlining massive events. "I'm not asking for anything outrageous," he said. "I'm just asking for a little more than what I got last time." Dana's response? Minimize it, mock it, gaslight it. That's the pattern. Whenever a fighter speaks up, the UFC paints them as ungrateful, delusional, or replaceable. But now, even Dana's golden boys are turning. Take Sean O'Malley, one of the UFC's most marketable stars. In an interview with Ariel Helwani, O'Malley admitted that early in his UFC career, he was making just $3,000 per fight, while being heavily promoted on ESPN, $3,000 to get punched in the face on national television. And for years, he didn't dare question it. Because in the UFC, you're taught one thing: shut up and fight, step out of line. And Dana White will make an example out of you. Jake Paul understands that. He's not just taunting the UFC, he's exposing its double standard. The UFC pays its fighters crumbs, then trashes them the moment they try to leave. Meanwhile, Jake is offering them something Dana can't: freedom. Bigger paydays, and yes, dignity. No wonder Francis Ngannou walked. No wonder Nate Diaz left. No wonder fighters are finally asking questions, not just in private, but in public. And at the end of his emotional post-fight press conference, when Max Holloway was asked about his coaches, about the people who raised him, but he didn't talk about violence or vengeance, he talked about character, because that's what this fight has become: not just a battle inside the Octagon, but a war for respect, fairness, and freedom. Fairness and freedom.
Be a good person. Be a good person, you know, and they're great guys, you know what I mean? They keep me in check. I mean, I can't say enough nice things about them, you know.
Read between the lines. What Max Holloway is really saying is this: my loyalty is to the people who actually care about me, not the company that uses me for ticket sales and tosses me aside when I'm no longer trending. And fans? They're starting to see it too. Go to Reddit. Go to Twitter. Go to any MMA forum. The tide is turning. The old narrative, Dana White saved the UFC, is being replaced by a new one. Dana White is the problem. And the more fighters speak out, the clearer it becomes that the UFC's greatest weapon has never been money or matchmaking or marketing. It's been fear: fear of being cut, fear of being benched, fear of being mocked, fear of being silenced, because fear keeps fighters quiet. And when that fear disappears, you get revolution. There's one thing Dana White has always understood better than most: control the narrative. And you control the fighter for years. The UFC didn't just own the Octagon, it owned the fighters inside it, their image, their words, their livelihoods, and it all started long before the pay. Disputes. It started with branding. Let's go back to 2015, the year the UFC announced its exclusive outfitting deal with Reebok. It was marketed as progress, a move toward professionalism. Uniforms, clean branding, a sleek new era for mixed martial arts. But behind the scenes, it was economic warfare. Overnight, fighters were stripped of their ability to display personal sponsors during fight week. No more logos on shorts, no more walkout banners, no more side deals that paid the bills between fights. What did that mean? It meant independence was gone. Fighters who once earned tens of thousands from sponsors were suddenly losing money, sometimes more than they made from the fight itself. According to MMA Fighting, top-ranked athletes saw their income collapse after the Reebok deal. Some lost up to 90% of their outside earnings, and when fighters protested, Dana White dismissed the outrage. "This is a fight, not a team sport," he said. "They'll adjust." But the truth was clear: the Reebok deal wasn't about professionalism, it was about control. The UFC decided what fighters wore, what sponsors they could represent, and how much they could earn, all under the guise of elevating the brand. And the message was unmistakable. The Octagon doesn't belong to the fighters. It belongs to the machine. Adjust. That's what Dana White said. But what fighters heard was clear: shut up and wear what we tell you. Even now, with the switch from Reebok to Venom, nothing has really changed. The structure is the same: a tiered payment system that maxes out at just $21,000 per fight for champions. Compare that to boxing, where fighters wear their own gear, promote their own brands, and walk away with millions. The UFC doesn't just control your body inside the cage. It controls your image, your likeness, and your marketability. This isn't just about fighter pay anymore. It's about fighter identity. And at the center of it all, Dana White's vendettas. Because if you cross him, your career is done. We've seen the pattern time and time again. Fighter pushes back. They vanish from title contention. A fighter speaks out publicly. They get benched. A fighter demands respect. They get erased. Take Randy Couture, one of the UFC's original legends. In 2007, Couture walked away from the UFC over pay disputes and disrespect. Dana's response? Not diplomacy, destruction. He launched a PR war, painted Couture as ungrateful, and when Couture's son entered the UFC years later, Dana went so far as to ban Randy from cornering his own child. He's not welcome here. Let that sink in. The UFC wouldn't let a father stand in his son's corner just to make a point. That's how far Dana White will go when he feels slighted. He's done it before, Tito. Ortiz, another former poster boy turned pariah. Their feud became one of the most public examples of Dana's scorched earth tactics. He mocked Tito's intelligence in interviews, ridiculed him in press conferences, and labeled him mentally weak for trying to negotiate better pay. At one point, Dana even claimed he'd box Tito himself just to humiliate him publicly. The message couldn't be clearer. Loyalty gets rewarded, defiance gets erased, and that's where we are. Now, the final reckoning. This isn't just a fighter problem anymore. This is a Dana White problem. And the longer the UFC pretends it's business as usual, the more fighters, fans, and insiders are standing up to say what everyone's been thinking. This empire is rotting. What started as a trickle, one or two brave voices, has become a storm. Not just over paychecks or bonuses, but over the entire culture Dana White built. A culture where violence is glorified, loyalty is weaponized, and silence is demanded. And the biggest trick of all? The myth of Dana White, the no-nonsense fan-first renegade. For years, fans believed it, because that's the version they were allowed to see. The UFC carefully crafted that image through selective media access. Blacklist threats and corporate spin. The reality? The empire isn't built on honor. It's built on fear, control, and silence. And part of that silence comes from friendly media partners. Journalists who stay quiet to keep their credentials. Because in Dana White's UFC, even the press is controlled. Take Ariel Helwani, once the most respected journalist in MMA. For years, he had full backstage access, interviews, and insight, until the day he asked the wrong question. 2016. Helwani broke the story of Brock Lesnar's surprise return at UFC 200 before the UFC could announce it themselves. Dana White's response? Not a warning, not a phone call. He had Helwani escorted out of the arena and banned for life. They gave me a lifetime ban for doing my job, Helwani said. Think about that. A journalist was exiled from the sport he helped grow simply because he told the truth before Dana. White could control the story. That's not media management, that's censorship. And it worked, because after that, countless reporters stayed silent. Not because they agreed with Dana, but because they didn't want to be next. So when fans ask, why don't fighters unionize? Or, why don't more people speak up? This is why. The entire machine, from the boardroom to the broadcast booth, is designed to make sure you never hear the full story. It would be easy to dismiss this if Dana White were just a quiet CEO, hiding behind corporate walls, but the truth is far darker. Dana isn't a behind-the-scenes executive. He's the face of the UFC. He's the face of the UFC, and he's shown the world exactly who he is, time and time again. He's publicly belittled journalists who question him. He's mocked fighters like Tyron Woodley, Chris Cyborg, and Demetrius Johnson, even when they were champions, calling them boring, difficult, or ungrateful, and when he feels challenged, he doesn't just argue, he humiliates. Remember the moment he mocked Tito Ortiz, saying, "Tito's not the brightest bulb on the porch." Now imagine that's your boss. Imagine that same man controls whether you get a fight, a paycheck, or a title shot. Still think it's not a big deal? Then let's talk about what happened when Dana White himself became the story. Earlier this year, at a New Year's Eve party, Dana was caught on video slapping his wife during a public altercation. The clip went viral. Fans were stunned. Mainstream outlets covered it around the world. And what was the UFC's response? No suspension, no fine, no investigation. Dana issued a half-hearted apology, but insisted that stepping down wouldn't be punishment, because the real punishment is living with it. Imagine if a fighter had done that, they'd be fined, suspended, or outright cut. But Dana White? Untouchable. Moments like this expose more than hypocrisy. They reveal the system itself, because Dana White isn't just abusing power, he is the power, and that brings us to the final bombshell. Let's be brutally honest. The UFC is one of the most successful sports empires on earth. But at what cost? The UFC is one of the most successful sports organizations on the planet. Its events sell out arenas. Its champions are global icons. Its brand, impeccable. But beneath the lights and logos, the foundation is cracking. Because Dana White built this empire on two lies. That fighters are lucky to be here, and that there's no alternative. Both lies are collapsing. Francis Ngannou walked away and made more money in one boxing match than in 5 UFC title defenses. Jake Paul, the outsider everyone mocked, is paying fighters more, giving them freedom and treating them with respect the UFC never offered. And across the world, fighters in PFL, One Championship, and Bellator are starting to out-earn UFC talent, especially the mid-tier warriors who've been carrying fight cards for scraps. Now, even the fighters inside the UFC are asking, why are we still putting up with this? The whispers that started in locker rooms have become group chats, shared spreadsheets, and union exploratory committees. According to MMA Fighting, the ongoing class action lawsuit could cost the UFC over $1 billion in damages if fighters win. And when that day comes, contracts will change. Public sentiment will shift, and Dana White will face the one thing he's avoided for 2 decades: accountability. Dana once said, "Women will never fight in the UFC." That was 2011 Bleacher Report. 2 years later, Ronda Rousey was headlining pay-per-views, plastered on magazine covers, and sold as the baddest woman on the planet. So what changed? Money. It wasn't a moral awakening. It was marketability. When Rousey became too big to ignore, Dana White pivoted, overnight, from skeptic to champion of women's MMA, but as soon as the hype faded, so did the support. Because while the UFC promotes women more than most combat sports, visibility is not equality. In 2023, reports showed that many top 10 female fighters were earning less than men ranked outside the top 15. Valentina Shevchenko reportedly made $60,000 to show and $60,000 to win, barely more than undercard men with half her legacy. Performance bonuses? Still skewed male-heavy, not because women don't deliver, but because women rarely headline, and Dana White personally decides who gets the bonuses. Even the UFC's social media tells the story. Female fighters get visibility only when they fit traditional beauty standards. Speak out and you're labeled difficult or unmarketable. Sound familiar? It's the same playbook used against male fighters who push back. Take Chris Cyborg, one of the most dominant female fighters of all time, mocked by Dana from day one. He questioned her femininity, ridiculed her physique, and infamously said she looks like Wanderlei Silva in a dress. She went undefeated for years, crushed opponents, and brought legitimacy to women's MMA, and the moment she lost, once, to Amanda Nunes, Dana pounced. He cut her, trashed her publicly, and accused her team of editing footage to make him look bad. Her real crime? Not being controllable. Same with Leslie Smith. She led Project Spearhead, an effort to unionize UFC athletes. She was winning fights. She was rising fast and then gone. Cut from the promotion without warning. The message was clear, organize, and you're out. That's not a coincidence, that's fear. And it's genderless. Now let's talk about what the UFC doesn't show in its glossy highlight reels, the aftermath, CTE depression. Long-term trauma. These aren't just NFL issues anymore. They're MMA issues. Fighters are coming forward, talking about memory loss, emotional breakdowns, and the toll of years of unprotected head trauma. And when they retire, what does the UFC offer? Nothing. No long-term health insurance, no pension, no counseling. Once you stop fighting, you stop existing. Veterans like Gray Maynard have spoken openly about the cognitive damage they've suffered. "I'm not the same," he said, "and they don't care." That's the truth behind the UFC's bright lights: silence, pain, and neglect. Because to acknowledge the damage would mean acknowledging responsibility. And that's the one thing Dana White's empire cannot afford to do. So what happens next? That depends on you. If you're a fan, ask yourself, why are you supporting a company that underpays its fighters and silences dissent? If you're a fighter, ask yourself, why fight for exposure when you could fight for equity? And if you're Dana White, maybe it's time to face the truth. The fighters made the UFC, not you, because the rebellion isn't coming. It's already here. Fighters are talking, fans are listening, and new promotions, PFL, even outsiders like Jake Paul's ventures, are gaining ground. Not because they're bigger, but because they treat fighters like human beings. When names like Jake Paul, Francis Ngannou, and Max Holloway all stand up and say enough, they're not complaining. They're warning us, warning that the UFC we've loved for years might not be the best the sport can be anymore. That, the Octagon, once a symbol of freedom and glory, has become something else. A cage of silence, locked by power, sealed with NDAs, and now the keys are being stolen back, one fighter at a time,